The Nok culture of ancient Nigeria stands as one of the most remarkable yet enigmatic early civilizations of sub-Saharan Africa, flourishing roughly between 1500 BCE and 300 CE in the central regions of what is now Nigeria, particularly across the Jos Plateau and surrounding areas. And its significance lies not only in its impressive artistic legacy, but also in its early mastery of iron technology, complex social organization, and long-distance cultural influence at a time when much of African prehistory remains poorly documented. The Nok people emerged in a landscape of rolling grasslands, river valleys, and wooded savannas that provided fertile soils for agriculture and access to vital natural resources such as clay, stone, and iron ore, allowing them to establish stable settlements long before many neighboring regions developed comparable levels of material culture. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Nok were among the earliest societies in West Africa to practice settled farming, cultivating crops such as pearl millet and possibly cowpeas, which formed the backbone of their subsistence economy and supported population growth and social differentiation. Their villages were likely composed of circular or oval huts made from mud and thatch, arranged in clusters that reflected kinship ties and communal living. And while the organic materials of these structures have long since decayed, traces such as post holes, hearths, and storage pits reveal a society accustomed to planning, cooperation, and long-term occupation of specific sites. What truly sets the Nok culture apart in the annals of African history is its extraordinary tradition of terracotta sculpture, which represents one of the earliest known examples of large-scale figurative art in sub-Saharan Africa and demonstrates a level of artistic sophistication that challenges outdated assumptions about the technological and cultural capabilities of early African societies. These terracotta figures, often depicting human heads or full bodies with elaborate hairstyles, jewelry, and expressive facial features, were crafted with remarkable skill, showing detailed eyes, pierced pupils, flared nostrils, and carefully modeled mouths that convey a striking sense of individuality and emotion. Some sculptures portray seated figures, warriors, musicians, or individuals adorned with armlets and necklaces, while others show exaggerated or stylized features that may reflect symbolic meanings, spiritual beliefs, or social roles rather than simple portraiture. The purpose of these terracotta works remains a subject of scholarly debate, as they have been found mostly in fragmentary form, often displaced by erosion or agricultural activity. But many researchers believe they played a role in ritual practices, ancestor veneration, or the expression of social identity within the community. The fact that these sculptures were intentionally fired in kilns or controlled firing environments indicates a deep understanding of ceramic technology, including temperature control and clay preparation, which would have required specialized knowledge passed down through generations of artisans. Equally important to the Nok legacy is their early use of iron, which appears in the archaeological record of the region around the first millennium BCE, making the Nok among the earliest ironworking societies in sub-Saharan Africa. Although scholars continue to debate whether this technology developed independently or was influenced by contacts with North Africa or the Nile Valley. Iron smelting would have revolutionized Nok society by providing stronger and more durable tools for farming, hunting, and warfare, enabling more efficient land clearance, increased agricultural productivity, and improved ability to defend territory or assert dominance over neighboring groups. Archaeological finds such as iron slag, furnaces, and tools suggest that iron production was carried out locally and at a scale sufficient to meet community needs, implying a level of organization and labor coordination that points to emerging social hierarchies or specialized roles within Nok communities. Blacksmiths, in particular, may have held a special status, as ironworking often carried spiritual or symbolic significance in many African cultures, with the transformation of raw ore into metal seen as a powerful and even sacred act. The spread of iron technology likely facilitated population expansion and the gradual diffusion of Nok cultural traits across a wide area of central Nigeria, influencing later societies and laying the groundwork for the development of more complex political formations in West Africa. Despite these impressive achievements, much about Nok's social and political organization remains unclear due to the absence of written records and the fragmentary nature of the archaeological evidence. Yet scholars generally agree that Nok society was not a centralized state, but rather a network of communities linked by shared cultural practices, trade relationships, and belief systems. The distribution of Nok artifacts across hundreds of kilometers suggests extensive interaction among groups, possibly through exchange networks that facilitated the movement of goods such as iron tools, pottery, stone objects, and foodstuffs, as well as ideas related to art, technology, and ritual. Environmental factors also played a crucial role in shaping Nok life, as climatic fluctuations over the centuries would have affected rainfall patterns, vegetation, and soil fertility, forcing communities to adapt their agricultural strategies, relocate settlements, or diversify subsistence practices in response to changing conditions. Over time, these pressures, combined with internal social changes and external influences, may have contributed to the gradual decline and transformation of the Nok culture by the early centuries of the Common Era, as distinct Nok artistic styles faded and new cultural traditions emerged in the region. The disappearance of the Nok as a recognizable cultural entity does not imply collapse or failure, but rather a process of cultural evolution, in which Nok traditions were absorbed, modified, and carried forward by successor societies that would eventually give rise to the complex kingdoms and civilizations of later West African history, such as those of the Yoruba, Hausa, and other groups. Modern rediscovery of the Nok culture began in the early 20th century, when terracotta fragments were unearthed by tin miners working in central Nigeria, sparking curiosity and scholarly investigation that gradually revealed the depth and antiquity of this forgotten civilization. Subsequent archaeological research, though often hampered by limited funding, looting, and environmental challenges, has confirmed the Nok culture's central place in African prehistory and underscored the need to protect its remaining sites and artifacts from destruction and illicit trade. The study of Nok has had a profound impact on our understanding of African history, demonstrating that sophisticated artistic expression, technological innovation, and complex social organization were present in West Africa long before the rise of written records or external influences, and challenging long-standing narratives that underestimated the contributions of African societies to human civilization. As scholars continue to analyze Nok artifacts using modern scientific techniques such as radiocarbon dating, metallurgical analysis, and comparative art history, new insights are emerging into the lives, beliefs, and achievements of the Nok people, offering a richer and more nuanced picture of ancient Africa. Part 1 of the Nok culture series thus serves as an introduction to a civilization that, though silent in written history, speaks powerfully through its art, technology, and enduring influence, inviting us to reconsider the deep roots of human creativity and innovation on the African continent, and setting the stage for a deeper exploration of Nok society, beliefs, and legacy in the parts that follow. Nok Culture Series continues the deep exploration of Nok society by examining how the civilization's enduring principles of adaptability, creativity, and relational ethics provide insight into the broader trajectories of West African cultural development and into universal patterns of human civilization. The Nok culture, with its long chronology spanning more than a millennium, demonstrates a remarkable capacity to negotiate change while preserving core social and spiritual values, suggesting that longevity in human societies often depends less on rigid structures or monumental displays of power than on flexibility, moral cohesion, and integration with the environment. One of the defining features of Nok society was its decentralized organization, which allowed multiple communities to operate semi-independently while remaining connected through networks of trade, ritual, and shared knowledge. These networks facilitated the flow of materials, artistic ideas, and technological innovations across central Nigeria, creating a broad cultural cohesion without necessitating centralized political authority. Ironworking, a hallmark of Nok technological achievement, provides a particularly illuminating case study of this decentralized model. Smelting and forging were not only practical endeavors, but deeply embedded within social and spiritual practices, with blacksmiths occupying positions of both technical expertise and ritual authority. The production of iron tools and weapons enhanced agricultural productivity, allowed for more sophisticated construction, and strengthened hunting capacities. But these benefits were inseparable from the ethical and ceremonial frameworks that governed their creation. This integration ensured that technological power reinforced communal stability rather than creating opportunities for coercive domination, highlighting a form of innovation fundamentally different from the extractive, hierarchically driven development seen in some other ancient societies. In parallel, Nok artistic expression reflected a similarly holistic approach, as terracotta sculptures functioned as more than aesthetic objects, serving instead as mediators between human and spiritual realms. The consistent emphasis on human heads, facial expression, and posture suggests a cultural philosophy attentive to consciousness, social identity, and moral responsibility. These figures were likely used in ritual contexts to honor ancestors, mark transitions in age and status, or facilitate communication with spiritual forces, embedding ethical and cosmological understanding within everyday life. In examining these practices, scholars have recognized that Nok material culture cannot be divorced from its social and ritual contexts. The fragmentation of terracotta figures, often interpreted initially as evidence of destruction, may instead reflect intentional ritual cycles, where breaking and reburying objects signified transformation, renewal, or passage between realms. Such interpretations underscore the need to consider Nok within its own conceptual universe, rather than through the lens of modern assumptions about permanence, utility, or aesthetic value. Environmental adaptation also played a central role in Nok society. Settlements were strategically located to balance access to fertile land, water, and iron ore deposits, reflecting an intimate understanding of local ecologies. Agricultural practices incorporated diverse crops and techniques that allowed communities to respond to seasonal and climatic variation, while hunting and gathering supplemented food security. By embedding survival strategies within ritualized frameworks and communal obligations, Nok society achieved resilience over centuries of environmental change, offering lessons in sustainability that resonate today. The transmission of knowledge in Nok society relied on relational and performative methods rather than written texts. Apprenticeship, oral storytelling, ritual instruction, and collective labor ensured that skills and values were preserved across generations, while allowing for adaptation and innovation. Elders and specialists served as both custodians of knowledge and moral guides, mediating between the needs of the community, the environment, and the spiritual order. These social structures promoted flexibility while maintaining continuity, illustrating a sophisticated understanding of intergenerational responsibility. Interactions with neighboring societies further enriched Nok cultural expression, facilitating the diffusion of artistic motifs, technological skills, and ritual practices. Trade networks, though primarily regional, enabled the movement of goods such as iron, stone, and pottery, while marriage alliances and shared ceremonial practices extended social cohesion across geographic distances. These exchanges demonstrate that Nok culture was both rooted in its specific ecological and social context and open to influences that strengthened its adaptive capacity. Modern rediscovery of Nok has illuminated both the achievements of the culture and the challenges of interpreting societies without written records. Early archaeological encounters highlighted the sophistication of Nok terracotta sculptures and ironworking, challenging assumptions that complex technologies and artistic traditions could not have emerged independently in sub-Saharan Africa. Subsequent research using radiocarbon dating, stratigraphy, and material analysis confirmed the antiquity and originality of Nok achievements, reshaping narratives of African history and emphasizing the region's central role in early technological and artistic innovation. These discoveries have had profound implications for contemporary African identity, offering evidence of deep historical roots and sophisticated cultural expression long before colonial contact. The ethical dimension of Nok heritage has also come to the forefront, as the looting and illegal export of artifacts threaten both the material record and the cultural integrity of the sites. Preservation efforts increasingly emphasize collaboration with local communities, integrating archaeological research with education, heritage management, and economic development to ensure that Nok remains a living connection to the past rather than a detached museum object. Philosophically, the Nok example invites reflection on alternative models of civilization that emphasize relational ethics, adaptability, and symbolic coherence. Unlike civilizations organized around centralized authority, monumental construction, or imperial expansion, Nok demonstrates that social complexity and cultural endurance can be achieved through networks, shared moral frameworks, and ritualized knowledge. In this way, Nok challenges conventional hierarchies in global history, revealing the diversity of pathways through which human societies have developed intelligence, creativity, and resilience. The enduring influence of Nok can also be traced in the aesthetic and technological traditions of later West African societies, where terracotta sculpture, ironworking, and social practices bear the imprint of these ancient precedents. Rather than disappearing, Nok culture evolved, integrated, and influenced the moral, artistic, and technological foundations of subsequent civilizations, demonstrating that cultural continuity does not require direct replication, but can operate through adaptation and reinterpretation. As Part 11 of the Nok series concludes, the culture emerges as a multifaceted phenomenon, whose significance lies as much in the patterns of thought, social ethics, and ecological understanding it fostered as in its material artifacts. By studying Nok, historians, archaeologists, and the wider public gain insight into how human societies can achieve longevity, creativity, and moral coherence without relying on centralized power or monumental permanence. Nok thus stands as both a historical reality and a conceptual model, illustrating the enduring potential of relational, adaptive, and ethically grounded civilizations. In appreciating Nok, we are reminded that the human story is richer and more diverse than linear narratives of conquest or textual documentation suggest, and that civilizations built on networks of knowledge, moral responsibility, and ecological balance can leave legacies as profound and instructive as any empire, monument, or chronicle. Through careful study and respectful engagement, the Nok culture continues to speak across millennia, offering lessons about innovation, community, spirituality, and continuity that remain relevant to the challenges and aspirations of humanity today. Nok Culture series delves further into the intricate social, technological, and symbolic systems that underpinned one of West Africa's earliest known civilizations, highlighting the ways in which Nok society exemplified sustainable human adaptation, cultural continuity, and creative sophistication over centuries. Central to understanding Nok is recognizing that its legacy extends far beyond the terracotta figures and iron artifacts that dominate archaeological attention. These objects are entry points into a living framework of knowledge, belief, and social practice that define the experience of generations. Nok communities appear to have been organized around networks of kinship and ritual obligation rather than centralized political structures, with social cohesion maintained through shared labor, spiritual practice, and moral accountability. Such a decentralized yet highly interconnected social system allowed for flexibility in response to environmental and social change, enabling the Nok culture to endure over a remarkably long period despite fluctuations in climate, resource availability, and population dynamics. Agricultural practices demonstrate a keen understanding of local ecologies and the necessity of sustainable resource management. Settlements were strategically located near fertile lands and water sources, and farming techniques appear to have been diversified to reduce vulnerability to drought or crop failure. These practices were likely embedded within ritualized frameworks that both regulated labor and reinforced ethical responsibility toward the land, illustrating the Nok integration of material survival and spiritual awareness. Iron metallurgy, perhaps the most celebrated technological achievement of Nok society, also reflects this holistic approach. Iron smelting and forging were not merely technical activities, but socially and ritually situated practices, overseen by blacksmiths whose authority derived from both skill and spiritual legitimacy. The mastery of iron allowed for the creation of tools that enhanced agricultural productivity, hunting efficiency, and artistic possibilities. Yet these innovations were carefully balanced with communal norms and ritual oversight to prevent ecological or social disruption. In this sense, technology functioned not only as an instrument of material improvement, but as a medium through which ethical and cosmological values were enacted, linking human activity with moral and spiritual order. Nok art similarly embodies this integration, as the terracotta figures and figurative motifs that have captivated modern observers were deeply embedded within social and spiritual life. The emphasis on the human head, exaggerated features, and expressive faces suggests a culture attentive to consciousness, identity, and relational responsibility, reflecting beliefs that individuals were inseparable from their social and spiritual networks. These figures likely played multiple roles, including participation in rituals, marking of social or life stage transitions, and serving as intermediaries between the living and ancestral or spiritual forces. The intentional breakage or burial of some sculptures may have been part of cycles of renewal and transformation, reinforcing concepts of continuity through ritualized impermanence. Knowledge transmission in Nok society relied heavily on relational, performative, and embodied methods. Skills such as pottery making, ironworking, and farming were taught through apprenticeship and hands-on participation, accompanied by oral instruction and ritualized guidance from elders. This system ensured that technical expertise was inseparable from ethical and social norms, maintaining both skill proficiency and cultural cohesion. The social roles of elders, ritual specialists, and skilled artisans were central to sustaining this intergenerational continuity, emphasizing that authority in Nok society derived not from coercion, but from responsibility, knowledge, and moral legitimacy. Interaction with neighboring groups through trade, marriage, and shared ritual practices facilitated cultural diffusion while preserving the core relational and ethical principles of Nok life. The movement of iron, pottery, and other materials helped knit a broad network of communities across central Nigeria, promoting both economic vitality and the dissemination of symbolic and technological knowledge. This exchange underscores the adaptability and resilience of Nok society, as it maintained identity and continuity even while incorporating new influences. The rediscovery of Nok in the 20th century challenged prevailing assumptions about the origins of complex art and technology in sub-Saharan Africa. Terracotta sculptures and evidence of advanced ironworking demonstrated that sophisticated cultural expression and technological innovation had developed independently in West Africa long before European contact. Radiocarbon dating and systematic excavation confirmed the antiquity of Nok society, reshaping global understandings of African history and asserting the continent's role in early human innovation. These discoveries also carry significant implications for contemporary identity and cultural pride, as they provide tangible evidence of deep African historical roots and sophisticated intellectual and artistic achievements. At the same time, the Nok legacy faces threats from looting, environmental degradation, and insufficient preservation, highlighting the need for ethical stewardship and community engagement. Protecting sites and promoting local involvement in research ensures that Nok heritage is not reduced to objects for collection, but remains a living connection to ancestry, place, and memory. Philosophically, Nok exemplifies an alternative model of civilization, one based on relational ethics, adaptability, and integration between human action, technology, and spiritual belief. Unlike societies organized around central authority, monumental architecture, or coercive expansion, Nock achieved complexity and resilience through networks, shared moral frameworks, and participatory knowledge systems. This approach challenges conventional historical hierarchies, demonstrating that civilization can thrive through balance, flexibility, and ethical coherence, rather than domination or accumulation. The influence of Nock extended well beyond its immediate temporal and geographic boundaries, shaping aesthetic, technological, and social patterns in later West African societies. Terracotta artistry, ironworking techniques, and ethical frameworks embedded in communal and ritual practice persisted, adapted, and evolved, demonstrating that Nock culture functioned as a foundational substratum upon which subsequent civilizations built, even as specific practices changed. In understanding Nock, historians gain insight not only into ancient West Africa, but into broader human possibilities, how societies can innovate without exploitation, sustain memory without writing, and maintain cohesion without centralized coercion. Nock invites reflection on fundamental questions about the organization of human life, the transmission of knowledge, and the role of art, technology, and ritual in sustaining ethical communities. Its enduring relevance lies in the lessons it offers for both historical understanding and contemporary reflection on sustainability, moral responsibility, and communal creativity. As Part 12 concludes, Nock emerges not merely as an archaeological culture or historical curiosity, but as a profound exemplar of relational, adaptive, and ethically grounded civilization. Its legacy challenges assumptions about what constitutes progress, permanence, and influence, reminding us that the human story is plural, complex, and interconnected. By studying Nock, we recognize that meaningful civilization depends as much on how societies relate to each other, the environment, and spiritual realms as on the artifacts they leave behind, and that the deepest lessons of history often reside in the patterns of life, thought, and ethical practice that continue to inform humanity across millennia. Nock Culture Series advances the exploration of one of Africa's most enigmatic and influential early civilizations by integrating perspectives on social organization, material culture, and philosophical worldview to present a comprehensive understanding of how Nock society sustained itself across centuries. Nock culture, flourishing in central Nigeria roughly between 1000 BCE and 300 CE, was remarkable not merely for its terracotta artistry or metallurgical innovation, but for its capacity to integrate technology, ritual, and social cohesion into a cohesive system that enabled resilience, creativity, and continuity. Socially, Nock communities operated through decentralized networks rather than centralized authority, allowing villages to maintain autonomy while remaining culturally connected through shared ritual practices, trade, and kinship alliances. This organizational structure promoted flexibility and adaptability, enabling communities to respond effectively to environmental variability, population shifts, and regional interactions without compromising ethical or spiritual frameworks. Kinship was the cornerstone of Nock social life, extending beyond immediate family to include extended networks that regulated inheritance, labor, and ritual participation. These networks provided both security and identity, ensuring that knowledge, skills, and moral codes were transmitted intergenerationally. Elders and ritual specialists acted as custodians of communal memory and as mediators in social and spiritual affairs, maintaining cohesion and ethical integrity. Within this framework, daily life was deeply intertwined with spiritual understanding and ecological awareness. Agricultural cycles were observed in tandem with ritual calendars, reflecting a worldview in which human survival depended upon attentiveness to natural and supernatural forces. Fertile soils, seasonal rains, and local flora and fauna were not merely resources, but participants in a network of reciprocal relationships, demanding respect, ceremonial acknowledgement, and sustainable management. Such integration of environmental knowledge, moral responsibility, and ritual practice underpin the resilience of Nok settlements, allowing them to persist and adapt over centuries. Technological advancement, particularly in iron metallurgy, was similarly embedded within social and spiritual systems. Ironworking was not an isolated technical skill, but a morally and ritually regulated practice, overseen by blacksmiths who held authority grounded in both technical mastery and spiritual responsibility. The transformation of raw ore into tools and implements was symbolically significant, reflecting broader cosmological understandings of transformation, potentiality, and ethical restraint. Iron tools increased agricultural productivity, facilitated hunting, and enabled construction, but their social impact was mitigated through communal regulation, apprenticeship, and ritual oversight, demonstrating a holistic approach to technological integration. Artistic production, especially terracotta sculpture, provides insight into the moral and philosophical dimensions of Nok culture. Figures emphasize the head, facial expression, and posture, signaling attention to consciousness, social identity, and moral presence. These sculptures were likely active participants in ritual life, mediating between the living and ancestral or spiritual realms and reinforcing concepts of ethical responsibility and communal cohesion. The deliberate fragmentation or burial of some figures suggests ritual cycles of destruction and renewal, reflecting an understanding of continuity that emphasizes transformation rather than static preservation. Knowledge transmission in Nok society relied upon relational and performative mechanisms. Skills in pottery, ironworking, agriculture, and ritual practice were learned through apprenticeship, storytelling, ritual participation, and communal labor. Instruction was situated within the broader moral and spiritual framework of society, ensuring that technical skill was inseparable from ethical conduct and social responsibility. Elders and skilled practitioners guided each generation, maintaining continuity while allowing for adaptive innovation as circumstances changed. Interaction with neighboring communities through trade, marriage, and shared ritual life reinforced social networks and facilitated the diffusion of artistic motifs, technological expertise, and ritual practices. These exchanges illustrate the permeability and adaptability of Nok culture, enabling it to influence broader regional developments without losing core values. Nok material culture, discovered primarily through terracotta artifacts and iron slag, provides both direct and interpretive access to these social and symbolic systems. Terracotta figures, despite their fragmentary survival, convey complex ideas about personhood, relationality, and the moral universe, while evidence of ironworking reveals the integration of technical mastery with social ethics. Radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic studies confirm the early antiquity and independent development of these practices, challenging outdated notions that complex technology and art were absent in sub-Saharan Africa prior to external influence. Modern scholarship has increasingly recognized the significance of Nok for understanding not only African prehistory, but also the diversity of early human civilization globally. Its achievements illuminate alternative pathways of societal development, demonstrating that social complexity, artistic sophistication, and technological innovation can flourish without centralized states, monumental architecture, or written records. Preservation and ethical engagement are crucial for sustaining Nok heritage in the contemporary era. Looting, environmental degradation, and artifact displacement threaten both material evidence and the cultural continuity it embodies. Collaborative approaches that integrate local communities, academic researchers, and governmental support are essential to protect sites, recover knowledge, and honor the relational and ethical dimensions of Nok society. Philosophically, Nok represents a civilization organized around relationships, balance, and moral integration. Technology, art, and social organization were mutually reinforcing, fostering innovation, resilience, and ethical coherence without reliance on coercion or rigid hierarchy. This model provides valuable insight into the multiplicity of human strategies for societal sustainability and challenges dominant narratives that equate progress with centralized authority or monumental achievement. The enduring influence of Nok is detectable in subsequent West African civilizations, which inherited and adapted aspects of its ironworking, artistic conventions, and social frameworks. Cultural transmission operated less through direct replication than through flexible adaptation of ethical, technological, and symbolic principles, demonstrating the dynamic continuity of cultural memory. As Part 13 of the Nok series unfolds, the civilization emerges not merely as a historical artifact, but as an instructive paradigm for understanding how societies can integrate technological innovation, moral responsibility, and communal cohesion. By engaging with Nok in this holistic manner, scholars and the public alike gain insight into the relational, adaptive, and ethically grounded nature of sustainable civilizations. The lessons of Nok extend beyond historical curiosity, offering reflection on contemporary challenges in social organization, environmental stewardship, and cultural preservation. Ultimately, Nok's significance lies in its demonstration that complex, creative, and enduring civilizations can thrive through balance, ethical engagement, and integration with both human and ecological networks, revealing dimensions of human ingenuity that resonate across time and continue to inform our understanding of the human past, present, and potential futures. Nok Culture Series advances the exploration of this remarkable West African civilization by synthesizing archaeological, technological, artistic, and philosophical dimensions to provide a fuller understanding of how Nok society endured, innovated, and influenced subsequent cultural developments. The longevity of the Nok culture, spanning over a millennium, can be attributed to its dynamic integration of social cohesion, ritualized knowledge transmission, and environmental adaptation. Unlike civilizations centered on centralized authority or monumental displays of power, Nok thrived through decentralized village networks connected by kinship, trade, and shared ritual life, allowing flexibility while maintaining cultural and ethical continuity. Social organization in Nok communities emphasized collective responsibility, moral oversight, and relational networks, with elders and ritual specialists serving as custodians of knowledge and mediators of ethical and spiritual conduct. Kinship extended beyond immediate family, encompassing broader networks that structured inheritance, labor, ritual participation, and social identity. These networks were critical in maintaining cohesion, enabling communities to adapt to demographic, environmental, or social shifts without losing continuity in values or practice. Environmental engagement was equally central to Nok's survival and resilience. Settlements were strategically located near fertile lands, water sources, and iron ore deposits, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the landscape. Agricultural cycles were harmonized with ritual observances, creating a worldview in which ecological awareness and spiritual acknowledgement were inseparable. Such integration of land, labor, and cosmology ensured sustainable resource management, enhanced resilience to environmental fluctuations, and reinforced ethical responsibility toward both community and earth. Iron metallurgy, a defining feature of Nok culture, illustrates the integration of technology, social organization, and ritual practice. Smelting and forging were not purely technical endeavors, but morally and spiritually regulated processes, overseen by blacksmiths who held authority grounded in both skill and ritual legitimacy. The transformation of raw ore into tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects symbolized the broader cosmological and ethical frameworks of Nok society, linking technical mastery to communal and spiritual well-being. Iron tools enhanced agricultural productivity, hunting efficiency, and material culture, yet their social and ecological impact was moderated through apprenticeship, ritual practice, and communal oversight. This holistic integration ensured that technological innovation reinforced cultural stability rather than destabilizing ethical or ecological balance. Artistic production, particularly terracotta sculpture, serves as a profound window into the moral, social, and spiritual ethos of Nok society. Sculptures emphasize the human head, facial expression, and posture, highlighting a cultural preoccupation with consciousness, identity, and relational responsibility. Figures were likely used in ritual contexts to mediate between humans and spiritual forces, commemorate ancestors, mark life stage transitions, or embody ethical ideals. The deliberate breakage, burial, or deposition of terracotta pieces may have reflected ritual cycles of transformation and renewal, illustrating a conception of continuity that embraced impermanence as a pathway to regeneration. Knowledge transmission in Nok society was relational, performative, and intergenerational. Skills in pottery, ironworking, agriculture, and ritual practice were passed through apprenticeship, hands-on participation, oral instruction, and communal engagement, ensuring technical competence was inseparable from moral and social instruction. Elders and skilled practitioners functioned as both educators and moral guides, maintaining continuity while allowing for adaptive innovation across generations. The diffusion of Nok influence into surrounding regions demonstrates the adaptability and resilience of its cultural system. Trade networks, marriage alliances, and shared ceremonial practices facilitated the transmission of artistic motifs, technological expertise, and ritual forms without imposing uniformity, allowing neighboring communities to integrate Nok principles within local contexts. Such exchanges contributed to the emergence of broader West African cultural patterns while preserving the relational and ethical core of Nok society. Archaeological rediscovery of Nok in the 20th century challenged entrenched assumptions about African prehistory, particularly regarding the origins of sophisticated art and technology in sub-Saharan Africa. Terracotta sculptures and evidence of advanced ironworking confirmed that complex material and symbolic culture developed independently in West Africa long before European contact. Systematic dating and contextual analysis affirmed the antiquity of these practices, reshaping both regional and global narratives of early human innovation. This rediscovery carries profound implications for contemporary identity, providing tangible evidence of intellectual, artistic, and technological achievement in Africa's distant past. However, the preservation of Nok heritage faces ongoing challenges, including looting, environmental degradation, and the displacement of artifacts. Ethical stewardship requires collaboration among archaeologists, local communities, and governmental authorities to protect sites, promote education, and ensure that material culture remains a living connection to ancestry and landscape, rather than a commodified object removed from context. Philosophically, Nok represents an alternative model of civilization, emphasizing relational ethics, adaptability, and integration between technology, social organization, and spiritual understanding. Complexity in Nok was achieved not through centralized authority, monumental architecture, or coercion, but through networks of knowledge, ethical responsibility, and ritual practice that ensured resilience, creativity, and continuity. This model challenges traditional hierarchies in historical analysis, demonstrating that civilizations can flourish through balance, integration, and moral coherence rather than through domination or accumulation. The long-term influence of Nok is visible in subsequent West African societies, which adapted its technological, artistic, and ethical frameworks while evolving in response to local and regional pressures. The continuity of these underlying principles illustrates the dynamic nature of cultural memory, whereby societies inherit not merely forms but relational logics, technological paradigms, and moral orientations that guide adaptation across time. Part 14 underscores the importance of approaching Nok not merely as an archaeological culture, but as a conceptual model illuminating enduring human capacities for ethical integration, technological ingenuity, and communal resilience. The study of Nok provides insight into how societies can harmonize innovation with moral and ecological responsibility, transmit knowledge intergenerationally, and sustain cohesion without coercive centralization. Its legacy continues to inform contemporary understanding of African history and global human development, offering lessons on how civilizations can thrive through balance, relational ethics, and integration with both human and environmental networks. Knock demonstrates that the most enduring forms of human achievement are those that combine creativity, moral responsibility, and adaptive intelligence, ensuring continuity and relevance even as specific practices transform over time. By engaging with Knock in this holistic manner, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of human history and the diverse strategies through which societies navigate complexity, cultivate innovation, and maintain cultural coherence, revealing a civilization whose influence resonates across millennia and remains profoundly instructive for the present and future. Knock Culture series continues the comprehensive exploration of this ancient West African civilization, delving into its social, technological, artistic, and philosophical dimensions while examining the enduring implications of its cultural frameworks for later societies and contemporary understanding. The Knock culture, which flourished in central Nigeria between roughly 1000 BCE and 300 CE, demonstrates the ways in which decentralized societies can achieve extraordinary technological and artistic sophistication while maintaining social cohesion, ethical coherence, and environmental sustainability. At the core of Knock society was an intricate system of relational networks that bound communities together through kinship, ritual, and shared labor. Social organization emphasized collective responsibility and moral accountability, with elders, ritual specialists, and skilled artisans functioning as custodians of both practical knowledge and spiritual guidance. These figures mediated relationships within and between families, oversaw intergenerational transmission of skills and values, and ensured that social and technological innovations were harmonized with ethical norms and cosmological principles. Such a system enabled Knock communities to remain resilient across centuries of environmental variability, population shifts, and cultural interaction, demonstrating that societal endurance depends not solely on political centralization or coercive authority, but on the cultivation of trust, reciprocity, and moral cohesion. Agricultural practices illustrate this integration of survival, ethics, and ritual. Settlements were strategically located near fertile soils, water sources, and iron ore deposits, allowing for both productive cultivation and access to essential materials. Farming techniques were diversified to mitigate risk, and crop cycles were synchronized with seasonal and ritual calendars, reflecting a worldview in which human labor was inseparable from ecological awareness and spiritual acknowledgement. Hunting and gathering supplemented agriculture, providing dietary and material variety while reinforcing ecological knowledge and ethical engagement with the land. Iron metallurgy was perhaps the most remarkable technological achievement of Knock society, representing both practical innovation and embedded cultural meaning. Smelting and forging were highly specialized activities regulated through apprenticeship, ritual observance, and moral oversight. Blacksmiths occupied unique social positions as both technical experts and spiritual intermediaries, symbolically transforming raw ore into implements that enhanced agriculture, hunting, and artistic production while reinforcing communal norms and ethical responsibility. Ironworking illustrates the Knock principle of integrating technological capacity with social and spiritual frameworks, ensuring that innovation reinforced stability rather than producing social or ecological imbalance. Artistic production, particularly terracotta sculpture, provides additional insight into Knock philosophical and moral sensibilities. Sculptures emphasize the human head, posture, and expression, reflecting a preoccupation with consciousness, social identity, and ethical responsibility. These figures were likely employed in ritual contexts, mediating between human and ancestral or spiritual realms, marking life stage transitions, or embodying moral and cosmological principles. Fragmentation and intentional deposition of terracotta pieces may have been part of cyclical ritual practices, demonstrating a conception of continuity and renewal that values transformation and relational meaning over static permanence. The transmission of knowledge in Knock society relied on embodied, relational, and performative methods. Skills such as pottery, ironworking, and farming were taught through apprenticeship, storytelling, communal labor, and ritual participation, ensuring that technical expertise was inseparable from moral guidance and social responsibility. Elders and specialists served as living archives, maintaining cultural continuity while permitting adaptation to new circumstances, allowing the society to innovate without losing its ethical core. Interaction with neighboring communities facilitated both material and symbolic exchange, as trade networks, marriage alliances, and shared ritual observances spread technological knowledge, artistic motifs, and ethical frameworks across central Nigeria. These exchanges exemplify Knock's adaptive capacity. Its cultural identity remained coherent while accommodating and integrating external influences. The archaeological rediscovery of Knock in the 20th century transformed global understanding of African prehistory, providing compelling evidence that sophisticated art and technology developed independently in sub-Saharan Africa long before European contact. Terracotta sculptures, ironworking residues, and settlement patterns demonstrated both technical ingenuity and symbolic sophistication, challenging long-standing assumptions about the origins of civilization in Africa. Systematic excavation, radiocarbon dating, and contextual analysis confirmed the antiquity and originality of Knock achievements, reshaping historiography and elevating African civilizations within broader narratives of human cultural development. Preservation of Knock heritage continues to pose significant challenges. Looting, environmental degradation, and the displacement of artifacts have disrupted archaeological context and removed cultural objects from the communities to which they belong. Ethical stewardship requires collaborative strategies that engage local populations, academic institutions, and governmental authorities to ensure that sites are protected, knowledge is documented responsibly, and cultural continuity is maintained. Such approaches honor the relational and ethical principles inherent in Knock society itself. Philosophically, Knock offers a model of civilization rooted in relationality, moral integration, and sustainable innovation. Its complexity was achieved through networks of knowledge and responsibility rather than centralized control or monumental display, illustrating that ethical coherence, adaptability, and communal engagement are central to durable societal systems. Technology, ritual, and artistic production were mutually reinforcing, ensuring that innovations strengthened rather than destabilized the social and ecological fabric. The influence of Knock culture extends into subsequent West African civilizations, which incorporated and adapted its technological, artistic, and ethical frameworks. Cultural transmission operated less through replication than through the selective integration of enduring principles, including relational governance, ritualized technological practice, and symbolic representation of moral and social ideals. This dynamic continuity demonstrates that the impact of a civilization is not measured solely by the longevity of specific artifacts or practices, but by the persistence of underlying patterns that inform human behavior, social organization, and cultural identity over time. The study of Knock provides insight not only into ancient West African society, but also into universal aspects of human civilization. How communities negotiate the balance between innovation and continuity, how ethical frameworks can guide technological development, and how cultural memory can be maintained without reliance on written records or centralized authority. Part 15 underscores the relevance of Knock for contemporary reflection on social cohesion, sustainable technological integration, and ethical engagement with the environment. The lessons embedded in Knock practice resonate with modern concerns about resource management, relational governance, and cultural preservation. By approaching Knock holistically, integrating archaeological evidence with social, ethical, and philosophical interpretation, scholars reveal a civilization whose enduring significance lies in the principles that guided its people, rather than solely in the objects they produced. Knock civilization thus emerges not as a historical curiosity, but as a profound model of relational, adaptive, and ethically grounded society. Its legacy demonstrates that creativity, technological mastery, and cultural continuity are most sustainable when embedded in networks of responsibility, moral guidance, and ecological awareness. Through the careful study of Nok, we gain insight into human potential for innovation and resilience, as well as into the diverse pathways through which civilizations can flourish. By reflecting on Nok's integration of art, technology, social structure, and ritual, we recognize that the most enduring forms of human achievement are those that balance ingenuity with ethical responsibility and adaptability, leaving legacies that continue to inform and inspire generations long after the society itself has transformed. As the Nok culture continued to develop across central Nigeria, its social life, belief systems, and daily practices became increasingly shaped by a close relationship between humans, nature, and the unseen spiritual forces that govern their world. And although much of this inner life must be reconstructed indirectly through archaeology, the material traces left behind offer compelling clues to a society rich in symbolism, ritual meaning, and communal identity. Nok settlements were not merely places of residence, but dynamic social spaces where agricultural work, craft production, ritual observance, and social interaction blended seamlessly into everyday life, creating a rhythm of existence that tied individuals firmly to their land and community. Farming remained the foundation of Nok survival, with seasonal cycles dictating labor patterns and social organization, and evidence suggests that communal cooperation was essential during planting and harvesting periods, reinforcing bonds of kinship and mutual obligation. Storage pits discovered at Nok sites indicate surplus production, which would have helped communities survive periods of drought or crop failure, and may also have supported craft specialists such as potters, sculptors, and blacksmiths who did not farm full-time. Pottery, in particular, was a central element of Nok domestic and cultural life, with vessels produced in a variety of shapes and sizes for cooking, storage, and ritual use, often decorated with incised patterns, comb impressions, or geometric designs that may have carried symbolic meanings or marked group identity. The skill evident in Nok ceramics reflects a deep understanding of clay properties and firing techniques, and the repetition of certain styles across wide areas suggests shared aesthetic traditions and regular interaction between communities. Beyond practical crafts, ritual life likely played a central role in Nok society, providing explanations for natural phenomena, reinforcing moral values, and maintaining harmony between the living, the ancestors, and the spiritual realm. The terracotta sculptures for which the Nok are famous are widely believed to be connected to these ritual practices, serving as representations of ancestors, deities, or spiritually significant individuals whose presence was invoked during ceremonies. The frequent emphasis on the head in Nok sculpture, often rendered disproportionately large and detailed compared to the body, aligns with a broader African symbolic tradition in which the head is seen as the seat of identity, destiny, and spiritual power, suggesting that these figures were intended to embody more than physical appearance alone. Facial expressions carved into Nok terracottas range from calm and contemplative to intense and alert, possibly reflecting different emotional or spiritual states, while elaborate hairstyles and adornments may have indicated age, status, profession, or ritual role within the community. Some sculptures depict individuals with physical abnormalities or exaggerated features, which may point to beliefs surrounding illness, transformation, or special spiritual attributes, highlighting the complexity of Nok cosmology and its nuanced understanding of the human condition. Music and performance likely accompanied many Nok rituals, even though instruments made from organic materials have not survived, and the presence of sculpted figures interpreted as musicians or dancers suggests that sound, movement, and visual symbolism were intertwined in ceremonial life. Social differentiation within Nok society can be inferred from variations in housing size, burial practices, and the distribution of prestige items such as finely made terracottas or iron objects, indicating that while Nok communities may not have formed centralized states, they were not entirely egalitarian. Elders, skilled artisans, spiritual leaders, and successful farmers may have held positions of influence, guiding communal decisions and mediating relationships with the spiritual world. Burial practices, though poorly preserved due to soil conditions and later disturbance, appear to have included the placement of pottery and possibly terracotta fragments with the deceased, suggesting beliefs in an afterlife or continued connection between the living and the dead. The integration of iron technology further transformed Nok daily life and social relationships, as iron tools improved agricultural efficiency and expanded the range of crafts and construction techniques available to the community. Iron hoes and axes made land clearance easier, allowing for the expansion of farmland and supporting larger populations, while iron spearheads and arrowheads enhanced hunting and defense capabilities, potentially altering patterns of conflict and cooperation with neighboring groups. The knowledge required for iron smelting and forging was complex and dangerous, involving high temperatures and specialized processes, which likely elevated blacksmiths to a respected and possibly ritualized status within Nok society. In many African cultures, blacksmiths were seen as mediators between the natural and supernatural worlds due to their ability to transform raw materials, and it is reasonable to assume that similar beliefs existed among the Nok, further integrating technology with spirituality. Trade and exchange networks expanded as Nok communities interacted with neighboring groups, exchanging iron tools, pottery, stone implements, and agricultural products. And while long-distance trade on the scale seen in later West African empires may not yet have developed, these regional networks facilitated cultural exchange and technological diffusion. Such interactions may explain similarities between Nok artistic styles and those found in later Nigerian cultures, suggesting a long continuum of aesthetic and symbolic traditions rather than abrupt cultural breaks. Environmental change remained a constant challenge for the Nok, as shifts in rainfall and vegetation over centuries would have required adaptation and resilience, and archaeological evidence indicates that communities responded by relocating settlements, adjusting crop choices, and diversifying subsistence strategies to include hunting and gathering alongside farming. Over time, these adaptive strategies helped Nok society persist for more than a millennium, a testament to its flexibility and deep understanding of the local environment. By the later phases of the Nok culture, changes in artistic style and settlement patterns suggest a gradual transformation rather than a sudden collapse, with terracotta production becoming less frequent or stylistically distinct and ironworking practices evolving in response to new social and economic realities. The reasons for these changes remain debated, but they likely involved a combination of environmental stress, population movements, and the emergence of new cultural identities that absorbed and reshaped Nok traditions. The legacy of the Nok culture is thus best understood not as a vanished civilization, but as a foundational chapter in the long and complex history of West Africa, whose innovations in art, technology, and social organization influence generations to come. Modern archaeological efforts continue to uncover new Nok sites and artifacts, refining chronologies and deepening our understanding of how this society functioned on a day-to-day basis, while also highlighting the urgent need for site preservation in the face of looting and development. Through careful study of settlement remains, pottery assemblages, metallurgical debris, and terracotta fragments, scholars are piecing together a picture of Nok life that emphasizes creativity, resilience, and interconnectedness. Part 2 of the Nok Culture series therefore moves beyond origins and achievements to explore the inner workings of Nok society, revealing a people whose daily lives were shaped by cooperation, belief, and innovation, and whose cultural expressions continue to resonate as powerful symbols of Africa's deep and sophisticated past, preparing the ground for a deeper examination of Nok influence and transformation in the chapters that follow. The later phases of the Nok culture reveal a period of transition, expansion, and gradual transformation that sheds light on how this remarkable civilization influenced the broader trajectory of West African history, even as its distinctive identity slowly blended into emerging cultural traditions. By the middle of the first millennium BCE, Nok communities had spread across a wide geographic area of central Nigeria, occupying diverse ecological zones ranging from open savanna to forest margins. And this expansion reflects both population growth and the adaptability of Nok subsistence strategies. Archaeological surveys indicate that settlements varied in size and function, with some serving as small farming hamlets, while others appear to have been larger hubs of craft production and exchange, suggesting a loose hierarchy of sites connected through social, economic, and ritual networks rather than centralized political authority. This decentralized pattern allowed Nok society to remain resilient in the face of environmental stress, as communities could relocate, reorganize, or adjust their economic focus without causing the collapse of the entire cultural system. As iron technology became more firmly established, its effects extended beyond agriculture and warfare into broader aspects of social life, enabling new forms of specialization and interaction that reshaped Nok communities from within. Iron tools increased productivity and efficiency, freeing some individuals from constant subsistence labor and allowing them to devote more time to crafts, ritual leadership, or trade, which in turn encouraged the growth of social roles defined by skill and knowledge rather than purely by kinship. This gradual differentiation did not necessarily lead to rigid class structures, but it did create a more complex social landscape in which status could be earned, displayed, and recognized through material culture, including finely crafted pottery, elaborate terracotta figures, and iron objects of superior quality. Artistic expression during this period continued to evolve, with terracotta sculptures showing both continuity and innovation, as traditional themes such as human figures with elaborate hairstyles persisted while new stylistic elements emerged, possibly reflecting shifting beliefs, external influences, or changing social priorities. Some later Nok sculptures exhibit increased abstraction, while others emphasize movement or posture, suggesting a dynamic artistic tradition responsive to social change rather than a static canon frozen in time. The distribution of these artworks across wide areas implies that artistic ideas traveled alongside people and goods, reinforcing shared cultural identities even as local variations developed. Trade networks likely intensified during the later Nok period, linking communities across central Nigeria and beyond. And although the archaeological record does not yet reveal evidence of long-distance trade comparable to later trans-Saharan networks, the movement of materials such as stone, iron, and distinctive pottery styles indicates sustained regional exchange. These networks not only facilitated economic interaction, but also served as channels for the transmission of ideas, technologies, and symbolic practices, helping to integrate Nok society into a broader West African cultural sphere. Contacts with neighboring groups may have introduced new crops, techniques, or artistic motifs, contributing to the gradual transformation of Nok traditions and blurring the boundaries between Nok and non-Nok cultural expressions. Environmental pressures continued to shape the course of Nok history, as climatic fluctuations altered rainfall patterns and vegetation cover, affecting agricultural productivity and settlement stability. Evidence suggests that some Nok communities responded by shifting cultivation strategies, incorporating more diverse crops, or placing greater emphasis on hunting and gathering to supplement farming, while others may have migrated to more favorable areas, carrying their cultural knowledge with them. These movements would have played a key role in spreading Nok-derived technologies and artistic traditions to new regions, influencing the development of later societies in Nigeria and beyond. By the early centuries of the Common Era, clear archaeological markers of the Nok culture, such as distinctive terracotta styles and settlement patterns, begin to fade from the record, signaling not a sudden disappearance but a gradual process of cultural transformation and integration. This transition likely involved the emergence of new identities shaped by changing economic conditions, population dynamics, and belief systems, with Nok traditions forming an important substratum rather than an isolated legacy. The ironworking knowledge refined by the Nok almost certainly persisted, forming the technological foundation upon which later West African societies built more complex political and economic systems. Similarly, Nok artistic principles, particularly the emphasis on expressive human representation and symbolic use of form, can be seen as precursors to the celebrated sculptural traditions of later Nigerian cultures, including those of the Yoruba and other groups, suggesting a long continuity of aesthetic and spiritual concerns across centuries. The question of Nok political organization during its later phases remains open, but the available evidence points toward flexible systems of leadership rooted in community consensus, ritual authority, and control of specialized knowledge rather than centralized coercive power. Such systems would have been well suited to managing dispersed populations and diverse environments, allowing Nok society to endure for over 1,000 years without the rigid structures that might have made it vulnerable to sudden collapse. Modern interpretations of the Nok culture have evolved significantly over time, moving away from earlier assumptions that viewed it as an isolated or anomalous phenomenon, and toward a more nuanced understanding of Nok as an integral part of Africa's deep historical processes. Advances in archaeological methods, including improved dating techniques and scientific analysis of materials, have helped refine the chronology of Nok sites and clarify the sequence of technological and artistic developments, while interdisciplinary approaches drawing on anthropology, art history, and environmental studies have enriched interpretations of Nok life and belief. At the same time, ongoing challenges such as looting and site destruction threaten to erase valuable evidence, underscoring the importance of heritage protection and responsible research in preserving the Nok legacy for future generations. The global significance of the Nok culture lies in its ability to reshape narratives of early human civilization by demonstrating that complex societies with advanced technologies and rich artistic traditions flourished in West Africa independently and early in world history. Nok challenges outdated models that placed Africa on the periphery of innovation, instead revealing a continent characterized by creativity, adaptability, and deep cultural continuity. By tracing the later development and transformation of Nok society, Part 3 of the Nok Culture series highlights the dynamic processes through which cultures evolve, interact, and endure, showing that the true legacy of the Nok is not confined to museum artifacts or archaeological sites, but lives on in the technological foundations, artistic sensibilities, and cultural memories of West Africa. This exploration sets the stage for further examination of Nok influence on subsequent civilizations and invites a broader reflection on how ancient African societies shaped the human story in ways that are only now beginning to be fully appreciated. The enduring importance of the Nok culture becomes most apparent when examining its long-term influence, modern rediscovery, and place within both African and global historical narratives. Because Nok is not merely an ancient society, frozen in time, but a cultural foundation whose echoes continue to shape understandings of identity, creativity, and technological achievement in West Africa. After the visible archaeological markers of Nok society faded during the early centuries of the Common Era, the people themselves did not vanish. Instead, their descendants and cultural inheritors merged into evolving communities that adapted Nok knowledge to new environments and social realities. This process of continuity through transformation is central to understanding Nok's true legacy. As ironworking traditions, agricultural practices, settlement strategies, and symbolic art forms continued to develop among later societies across Nigeria. The mastery of iron metallurgy pioneered or refined during the Nok period provided a technological base that later groups expanded upon, enabling the rise of more complex economies, denser populations, and increasingly sophisticated political systems. Without this early metallurgical knowledge, the later emergence of powerful kingdoms and urban centers in West Africa would have followed a very different trajectory, demonstrating that Nok achievements were not isolated innovations, but crucial steps in a long chain of historical development. Artistic continuity offers perhaps the most visually striking evidence of Nak's lasting impact, as scholars have long noted similarities between Nak terracotta traditions and later sculptural styles found among Yoruba, Igbo, and other Nigerian cultures. While direct lineage is difficult to prove archaeologically, shared aesthetic principles, such as emphasis on the human figure, symbolic exaggeration of features, and the use of art as a medium for spiritual and social expression, suggest a deep-rooted cultural philosophy that persisted long after Nok-specific styles disappeared. In this sense, Nok art represents not a lost tradition, but an ancestral voice within a broader West African visual language that continued to evolve over centuries. The spiritual worldview reflected in Nok material culture also appears to have endured, particularly the belief in an interconnected cosmos where humans, ancestors, nature, and spiritual forces exist in constant interaction. Such ideas are central to many later African religious systems, reinforcing the notion that Nok cosmology contributed to enduring patterns of belief rather than standing apart as an anomaly. The modern rediscovery of the Nok culture in the 20th century dramatically altered scholarly perceptions of African history, as the initial discovery of terracotta fragments by tin miners challenged deeply entrenched colonial-era assumptions that complex art and early technological innovation could not have developed independently in sub-Saharan Africa. Early researchers were often puzzled by the sophistication of Nok sculptures, sometimes even questioning their African origin, a reaction that reveals more about historical bias than about the culture itself. As systematic archaeological research progressed, however, radiocarbon dating and stratigraphic analysis firmly established Nok as an indigenous African civilization dating back more than 2 millennia, forcing a reevaluation of Africa's role in global prehistory. This shift had profound implications, not only for academic understanding, but also for cultural identity and heritage within Nigeria and across the African continent. Nok became a symbol of deep historical roots, artistic excellence, and technological ingenuity, offering a powerful counter-narrative to centuries of misrepresentation. At the same time, the global fascination with Nok art created new challenges, particularly the widespread looting and illegal trafficking of terracotta figures, which has caused irreparable damage to archaeological contexts and deprived scholars of crucial information about how these objects were used and understood within their original settings. The loss of context is especially tragic because Nok material culture is one of the primary sources through which the society can be studied, and each looted artifact represents a fragment of history torn from its narrative framework. Efforts by Nigerian authorities, international organizations, and researchers to combat illicit trade and promote site preservation highlight the ongoing struggle to balance global interest with ethical responsibility, emphasizing that cultural heritage is not merely a commodity, but a collective human legacy. Contemporary archaeological projects increasingly emphasize collaboration with local communities, recognizing that sustainable preservation depends on education, economic alternatives, and shared stewardship rather than external control alone. Through such initiatives, Nok sites are gradually being reinterpreted not as relics of a distant past, but as living landscapes connected to present-day identities and livelihoods. In the broader context of world history, the Nok culture occupies a crucial position in discussions of early iron technology, challenging linear models that place the origins of metallurgy solely in the Near East or Mediterranean world before diffusing outward. While debates continue over whether ironworking in Nok developed independently or through indirect contact, what remains clear is that Nok society mastered and adapted this technology in ways uniquely suited to its environment and social structure. This adaptability underscores a key theme in Nok history: innovation grounded in local knowledge rather than passive imitation. The same principle applies to Nok art, which does not simply replicate external forms, but expresses a distinctive aesthetic rooted in African symbolic systems and social values. By examining Nok within a global comparative framework, historians and archaeologists gain a more balanced understanding of how early civilizations emerged across different regions, each responding creatively to local challenges and opportunities. The story of Nok also carries important lessons for how history itself is constructed and interpreted, reminding us that absence of written records does not equate to absence of complexity, intelligence, or historical significance. Nok society, like many early African cultures, relied on oral traditions, material expression, and embodied knowledge to transmit values and skills across generations, forms of history that require different methods of interpretation, but are no less valid than written texts. Recognizing this challenges conventional hierarchies of evidence and encourages more inclusive approaches to studying the human past. As scholarship continues to advance, new technologies such as remote sensing, soil analysis, and experimental archaeology promise to reveal further insights into Nok settlement patterns, agricultural systems, and metallurgical processes, gradually filling gaps left by earlier research limitations. Each discovery adds depth to the narrative, transforming Nok from a mysterious culture, known primarily through fragmented sculptures, into a richly contextualized society with a dynamic history. The cultural significance of Nok extends beyond academia into contemporary art, education, and national identity, where its imagery and symbolism are increasingly celebrated as sources of inspiration and pride. Nigerian artists, writers, and historians have drawn upon Nok motifs to explore themes of ancestry, continuity, and resilience, demonstrating that the culture's influence remains active rather than purely historical. In this way, Nok serves as a bridge between past and present, offering a tangible connection to deep time while informing modern expressions of creativity and self-understanding. Part 4 of the Nok Culture series thus brings the journey to a reflective conclusion, emphasizing that the true importance of Nok lies not only in its antiquity or artistic achievements, but in its capacity to reshape how history is perceived, valued, and remembered. By tracing Nok's legacy through technological foundations, artistic traditions, scholarly rediscovery, and modern cultural meaning, this final part affirms Nok as a cornerstone of African civilization and a vital chapter in the shared story of humanity, reminding us that the roots of innovation, beauty, and social complexity run deep across the African continent and continue to nourish the present through the enduring power of the past. The Nok culture, when examined as a complete historical continuum rather than a collection of isolated artifacts, offers profound insight into how early African societies generated systems of knowledge, resilience, and meaning that shaped human development over millennia. And Part 5 of this series brings a deeper analytical reflection on Nok as a living process of civilization rather than a static archaeological category. At its core, Nok society demonstrates how innovation arises organically from interaction between environment, belief, and human creativity, revealing that technological progress and artistic expression were inseparable from social values and cosmological understanding. The Nok people did not simply adapt to their surroundings. They interpreted the natural world through symbolic frameworks that informed how they farmed, built, worshipped, and governed themselves, creating a worldview in which material and spiritual realities were deeply intertwined. This integrated perspective is visible in every aspect of Nok material culture, from the placement of settlements near fertile land and water sources to the ritualized nature of iron smelting and the symbolic exaggeration of human features in terracotta sculpture. Such practices suggest that Nok knowledge systems were holistic, emphasizing balance and continuity rather than domination over nature, a philosophy that would resonate strongly in later African cultural traditions. When viewed through this lens, Nok iron technology was not merely a technical breakthrough, but a cultural transformation that redefined human relationships with the earth, as extracting and reshaping metal from stone carried profound spiritual implications alongside practical benefits. The rituals likely surrounding smelting and forging reinforced social cohesion, established moral boundaries around specialized knowledge, and ensured that technological power remained embedded within communal ethics rather than individual exploitation. This balance between innovation and restraint may explain the longevity of Nok society, which endured environmental changes and social evolution without collapsing into rigid hierarchies or ecological exhaustion. Nok artistic traditions further reinforce this interpretation, as their terracotta figures rarely depict domination or conquest, but instead emphasize identity, presence, and spiritual awareness, suggesting a culture more concerned with continuity and moral order than with imperial expansion. The repeated focus on the human head as a symbolic center reflects a philosophical emphasis on consciousness, destiny, and communal responsibility, implying that leadership and authority were grounded in wisdom and spiritual alignment rather than coercive force. This worldview likely influenced how Nok communities resolved conflict, distributed resources, and maintained social harmony, relying on ritual authority, elder mediation, and shared cosmological values instead of centralized state power. As Nok culture transitioned into later West African traditions, these principles did not disappear but evolved, influencing the ethical foundations of emerging societies that would later form kingdoms, city-states, and trade networks. The persistence of Nok-derived aesthetics and technologies suggests that cultural memory in West Africa functioned less as linear inheritance and more as layered accumulation, where older ideas were continuously reinterpreted within new social contexts. This process challenges simplistic models of rise and fall, emphasizing instead cycles of transformation that preserve core values while allowing adaptive change. From this perspective, Nok should be understood as a deep cultural root rather than a vanished civilization, its influence diffused across time through practices, symbols, and knowledge systems embedded in everyday life. The modern study of Nok also reveals important lessons about the nature of historical knowledge itself, particularly the limitations imposed by written records as the primary measure of civilization. Nok history survives through soil, clay, slag, and form, demanding interpretive methods that honor material intelligence and embodied knowledge as legitimate historical sources. This approach expands the boundaries of historiography, recognizing that societies without writing can produce complex philosophies, advanced technologies, and refined artistic traditions equal in depth to those documented in texts. The challenges faced by Nok archaeology, including looting, erosion, and incomplete data, further highlight the ethical responsibilities of modern scholarship, reminding us that understanding the past requires both scientific rigor and cultural sensitivity. Each damaged site represents not only lost information, but a broken connection between contemporary communities and their ancestral heritage, underscoring the urgency of preservation as an act of historical justice. At the same time, the global recognition of Nok has contributed to a broader reevaluation of Africa's role in world history, positioning the continent as a generator of innovation rather than a passive recipient of external influence. This shift has implications beyond academia, influencing education, identity formation, and cultural pride within Africa and across the African diaspora. Nok stands as tangible evidence that creativity, complexity, and technological mastery have deep African origins, offering a counterbalance to narratives shaped by colonial bias and historical exclusion. In contemporary cultural discourse, Nok symbolism has become a powerful resource for reclaiming historical agency, inspiring artists, scholars, and communities to engage with the past as a source of strength rather than loss. The philosophical implications of Nok history extend even further, inviting reflection on alternative pathways of human development that prioritize integration over extraction, symbolism over domination, and continuity over conquest. In a modern world grappling with ecological crisis and social fragmentation, the Nok example offers a quiet but profound reminder that sustainable societies are built not solely on technological advancement, but on ethical relationships between people, resources, and belief systems. By embedding innovation within ritual, art, and communal responsibility, Nok society maintained equilibrium across centuries of change, a lesson that remains deeply relevant today. As this series reaches its concluding reflection in Part 5, Nok emerges not only as an archaeological culture, but as a conceptual framework for understanding civilization itself, one that challenges narrow definitions and invites a more inclusive, pluralistic view of human history. Nok teaches us that civilization does not require monuments of stone or chronicles of kings to be real and influential, but can thrive through shared values, skilled hands, and collective memory carried across generations. In recognizing Nok's enduring legacy, we acknowledge that the foundations of human progress are diverse and interconnected, shaped by countless societies whose contributions deserve equal recognition. The Nok culture thus stands as a testament to Africa's deep historical intelligence and creative power, reminding us that the story of humanity is richer, older, and more complex than any single narrative can capture, and that by listening carefully to the silent voices preserved in clay and earth, we can gain a more truthful and humane understanding of our shared past. The continuation of the Nok culture narrative in Part 7 invites an even deeper immersion into the philosophical, comparative, and human dimensions of this ancient civilization, pushing beyond archaeology into the realm of meaning, identity, and long-term civilizational patterns that connect Nok to the broader human experience. When Nok society is viewed through a comparative lens, alongside other early civilizations of the world, its uniqueness becomes clearer not because it lacked complexity, but because it embodied a different logic of development, one that prioritized adaptability, symbolic coherence, and communal balance over territorial expansion or rigid political hierarchy. Unlike civilizations that left behind monumental stone architecture or royal inscriptions, Nok left traces embedded in earth, clay, and iron, signaling a worldview in which permanence was not measured by immovable structures, but by continuity of knowledge and practice across generations. This approach to civilization challenges deeply ingrained assumptions about progress and success, reminding us that societies can achieve longevity and influence without centralized states or written bureaucracies. Nok settlements, dispersed yet culturally connected, formed a living network rather than a fixed center, enabling cultural resilience in the face of environmental uncertainty and social change. This networked structure allowed ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions to circulate fluidly, reducing dependence on any single location or authority, and ensuring that cultural knowledge could survive migration, adaptation, and transformation. Such a system reflects a sophisticated understanding of risk management and social sustainability, one that resonates strongly with contemporary discussions about decentralized systems and community-based governance. At the heart of this system was a shared cosmology that gave meaning to daily life and framed human activity within a larger spiritual and ecological order. Nok art, especially the terracotta figures that continue to captivate modern audiences, should therefore be understood not merely as aesthetic achievements, but as visual philosophy, encoding beliefs about personhood, morality, and the relationship between the visible and invisible worlds. The expressive faces, stylized features, and deliberate emphasis on the head reflect a cultural preoccupation with inner life, destiny, and ethical responsibility, suggesting that Nok society placed great value on self-awareness and spiritual alignment. These sculptures were likely active participants in ritual life, serving as mediators between human communities and ancestral or spiritual forces, and their fragmentation in the archaeological record may itself reflect ritual practices involving breakage, renewal, or transformation rather than simple destruction. In this sense, Nok material culture speaks a language of process rather than permanence, reinforcing the idea that meaning was generated through action and participation rather than static display. Iron technology further illustrates this philosophy, as the act of smelting transformed raw, hidden ore into useful metal through fire, skill, and ritualized knowledge, mirroring broader themes of transformation central to Nok cosmology. The blacksmith's role as both technician and spiritual intermediary highlights the integration of practical and metaphysical domains, a feature common in many African societies, but already fully developed in Nok times. This integration ensured that technological power remained socially embedded and morally regulated, preventing the emergence of purely exploitative or alienating forms of production. Over centuries, such practices fostered a culture of restraint and responsibility, enabling Nok communities to thrive without exhausting their environment or fracturing their social fabric. As Nok traditions diffused into later West African cultures, these ethical foundations continued to shape approaches to leadership, craftsmanship, and spiritual authority, even as new political forms emerged. The endurance of these values suggests that Nok's most important legacy may lie not in specific artifacts or techniques, but in underlying cultural principles that proved adaptable across time and context. Modern engagement with Nok history has increasingly emphasized this intangible heritage, recognizing that the true significance of Nok cannot be fully captured through museum displays alone. Instead, Nok must be understood as a source of cultural memory and philosophical insight that continues to inform African identities and global understandings of civilization. For many contemporary Africans and members of the African diaspora, Nok represents a reclaimed depth of history that counters narratives of absence and marginality, providing tangible evidence of ancient innovation, artistry, and intellectual sophistication. This reclamation has political as well as cultural implications, challenging inherited frameworks of knowledge and authority that have long excluded African contributions from the core of world history. The process of studying Nok has therefore become part of a larger movement toward epistemic justice, where multiple ways of knowing the past are acknowledged and valued. At the same time, the Nok case exposes the vulnerabilities of such knowledge, as looting, environmental degradation, and uneven research resources continue to threaten what remains of the archaeological record. Each lost site is not only a loss for scholarship, but a rupture in the dialogue between past and present, underscoring the need for preservation strategies that are locally grounded and globally supported. Collaborative archaeology, public education, and ethical stewardship are thus essential components of Nok's future as a subject of study and cultural significance. Looking forward, the Nok culture offers fertile ground for interdisciplinary research that bridges archaeology, anthropology, philosophy, environmental studies, and art history, allowing for richer interpretations that move beyond typologies and chronologies to address questions of meaning, values, and lived experience. Such approaches align with a growing recognition that ancient societies cannot be fully understood through material remains alone, but require imaginative and respectful engagement with the cultural logics that shaped them. In this context, Nok becomes a case study in how civilizations can be both deeply rooted and fluid, maintaining continuity without rigidity and innovation without rupture. As Part 7 of the Nok Culture series unfolds, it becomes clear that Nok's story is not one that ends with a definitive conclusion, but one that continues to unfold as new questions are asked and new perspectives are applied. Nok challenges us to rethink what it means to be civilized, to innovate, and to remember, offering a vision of human history that is plural, interconnected, and ethically grounded. By engaging with Nok at this level, we do more than reconstruct an ancient society. We participate in an ongoing conversation about humanity's diverse pathways through time, recognizing that the clay figures, iron tools, and silent landscapes of central Nigeria still have much to teach us about resilience, creativity, and the enduring search for meaning. Nok Culture series deepens the exploration by focusing on the human experience behind the archaeology, attempting to reconstruct how Nok individuals may have perceived time, identity, community, and continuity within a world, shaped by both visible realities and invisible forces. To understand Nok society at this intimate level is to move beyond objects and dates, and to imagine lived lives structured by rhythm, memory, and shared meaning. Time for the Nok people was likely cyclical rather than linear, governed by agricultural seasons, ritual calendars, and ancestral remembrance, creating a sense of continuity in which past, present, and future were interconnected rather than sharply divided. This cyclical perception would have reinforced social stability, as each generation inherited not only land and tools, but also responsibilities, values, and cosmological knowledge that defined what it meant to be human within the Nok world. Identity was therefore communal as much as individual, shaped by lineage, age group, skill, and spiritual role, and expressed materially through body adornment, hairstyle, scarification, and the symbolic language preserved in terracotta sculpture. Nok figurines, with their carefully modeled faces and deliberate emphasis on gaze and posture, can be read as visual affirmations of personhood, suggesting that being seen, recognized, and remembered held deep cultural importance. These representations were not idealized abstractions detached from reality, but embodied social memory, encoding collective understandings of dignity, moral presence, and spiritual alignment. In everyday life, Nok individuals would have moved through landscapes imbued with meaning, where hills, rivers, groves, and iron-rich soils were not merely resources, but participants in a living cosmos. Farming was both labor and ritual, as preparing the land, planting seeds, and harvesting crops involved negotiation with natural and spiritual forces that could not be controlled, but had to be respected and honored. Such practices fostered humility and attentiveness, reinforcing ethical relationships between humans and their environment that helped sustain Nok society over centuries. Children grew up learning not only practical skills, but also stories, songs, and symbolic codes that taught them how to interpret the world, embedding knowledge in memory and performance rather than written instruction. Elders served as custodians of this knowledge, guiding younger generations through rites of passage that marked transitions in age, responsibility, and spiritual awareness. These rites likely involved music, dance, storytelling, and the use of symbolic objects, creating emotionally powerful experiences that bound individuals to their community and ancestors. The absence of monumental architecture in Nok society does not indicate a lack of ambition or organizational capacity, but rather reflects a cultural choice that prioritized mobility, adaptability, and relational permanence over fixed displays of power. Social cohesion was maintained not through coercive institutions, but through shared belief, mutual dependence, and the moral authority of tradition, enabling Nok communities to function effectively without rigid hierarchies. Conflict, when it arose, was likely addressed through mediation and ritual reconciliation rather than sustained warfare, as the archaeological record shows limited evidence of large-scale violence or fortification. Iron weapons existed, but their presence does not dominate the material culture, suggesting that their primary role was hunting and defense rather than conquest. This restrained use of force aligns with a broader Nok ethos that valued balance and continuity over expansion, reinforcing the idea that survival depended on cooperation rather than domination. As Nok communities interacted with neighboring groups, cultural exchange occurred through intermarriage, trade, and shared ritual practices, gradually blending identities while preserving core values. This permeability allowed Nok traditions to spread without imposing uniformity, contributing to a mosaic of cultural expressions across central Nigeria that shared underlying principles while adapting to local contexts. Over generations, such interactions blurred the boundaries of what could be defined as Nok, transforming it from a distinct archaeological culture into a foundational influence embedded within emerging societies. Memory played a crucial role in this process, as ancestral knowledge was carried forward through stories, rituals, and artistic conventions rather than fixed symbols of statehood. Even as specific artistic styles changed, the deeper logic of symbolic representation and spiritual integration persisted, ensuring continuity beneath surface transformation. In modern times, efforts to interpret Nok culture increasingly recognize the importance of honoring this intangible heritage, acknowledging that material remains alone cannot fully convey the lived realities of Nok people. Anthropological comparison with later African societies offers valuable insight, as many patterns observed among the Nok resonate strongly with documented traditions across West Africa, including reverence for ancestors, ritualized craftsmanship, communal land stewardship, and symbolic art forms. These continuities suggest that Nok was not an isolated experiment, but part of a long cultural conversation within Africa, contributing foundational ideas that shaped subsequent social formations. The emotional dimension of Nok history is also significant, as rediscovering such an ancient and sophisticated culture has profound implications for how African pasts are valued and understood. For communities living near Nok sites today, the land is not merely an archaeological resource, but a place of ancestral presence, where history is felt as much as studied. Respecting this connection requires approaches to research and preservation that prioritize local voices and lived relationships with the landscape, ensuring that Nok heritage remains meaningful rather than abstract. The global fascination with Nok art, while testament to its power, risks detaching objects from their cultural contexts, turning expressions of lived experience into aesthetic commodities. Addressing this tension requires a shift in perspective, recognizing that Nok sculptures are not isolated masterpieces, but fragments of a broader cultural system rooted in human relationships, belief, and memory. As scholarship continues to evolve, interdisciplinary approaches that combine archaeology with oral history, philosophy, and environmental studies promise richer and more humane interpretations of Nok life. These approaches move beyond asking what Nok people made to exploring how they understood existence, responsibility, and belonging within a dynamic world. Part 8 of the Nok Culture series thus brings the narrative closer to the human heart of the civilization, emphasizing that Nok history is ultimately a story of people navigating uncertainty with creativity, ethics, and shared meaning. By imagining Nok not only as an archaeological culture, but as a lived world of emotions, relationships, and choices, we gain a deeper appreciation for its endurance and relevance. The Nok experience reminds us that civilization is not defined solely by scale or permanence, but by the quality of human connection, the wisdom embedded in daily practice, and the ability to sustain meaning across generations. In listening carefully to the silent testimony of clay figures, iron slag, and worn landscapes, we are invited to reflect on our own values and trajectories, recognizing that the questions Nok people faced about balance, responsibility, and continuity remain central to the human story today. The Nok Culture series extends the reflection even further by examining Nok as a civilization of relationships, where human life was structured through interconnected layers of kinship, environment, technology, and belief, forming a coherent social fabric that sustained communities across centuries of change. In Nok society, relationships were not limited to interactions among the living, but extended outward to ancestors, spirits, animals, landforms, and materials, creating a worldview in which existence itself was relational rather than individualistic. This perspective shaped how Nok people understood responsibility, morality, and continuity, as every action was embedded within a network of visible and invisible consequences. Kinship likely formed the backbone of social organization, with extended family groups sharing land, labor, and ritual obligations, reinforcing mutual dependence and collective identity. These kin-based units provided stability and support, enabling communities to adapt to environmental uncertainty and social change without fragmenting. Marriage alliances between groups would have strengthened social networks, facilitated cultural exchange, and helped maintain peace, weaving a web of relationships that extended beyond individual settlements. Such alliances likely played a key role in the diffusion of Nok artistic styles, technological knowledge, and ritual practices across central Nigeria, ensuring cultural continuity even as populations shifted and identities evolved. The relationship between Nok people and their environment was equally central, as land was not treated as an inert resource, but as a living partner requiring respect, care, and ritual negotiation. Agricultural practices reflected this ethos, with farming techniques adapted to local conditions and seasonal rhythms rather than imposed through rigid systems, allowing soil fertility and ecological balance to be maintained over long periods. Iron production, while transformative, was carefully integrated into this environmental relationship, as the extraction of ore and use of fire demanded ethical restraint and spiritual acknowledgement. The ritualization of metallurgy can thus be understood as a means of regulating technological power, ensuring that innovation did not disrupt the moral and ecological equilibrium upon which Nock's survival depended. Technology in Nock's society was therefore not an autonomous force driving change, but a socially embedded practice shaped by values and belief. This integration extended to artistic production, where terracotta sculpture functioned as a medium for expressing and reinforcing relationships between humans and the spiritual world. These figures were not passive objects, but active participants in social life, invoked during rituals, ceremonies, and moments of transition to mediate between different realms of existence. Their deliberate fragmentation, burial, or placement within specific contexts may have been part of ritual cycles of creation and dissolution, mirroring broader themes of life, death, and renewal central to Nock cosmology. Through such practices, art became a living process rather than a static product, reinforcing communal memory and shared identity. The transmission of knowledge in Nock society relied heavily on apprenticeship, storytelling, and ritual participation, embedding learning within social relationships rather than abstract instruction. Skills such as pottery, ironworking, farming, and ritual leadership were passed down through generations in ways that emphasized moral responsibility alongside technical proficiency. This mode of knowledge transmission ensured continuity while allowing for gradual innovation, as each generation adapted inherited practices to new circumstances without severing ties to the past. Elders and specialists thus served as cultural anchors, maintaining coherence within a dynamic social system. As Nock society evolved and interacted with neighboring cultures, these relational foundations allowed for integration without erasure, enabling Nock traditions to blend into emerging cultural formations while preserving core values. This process of integration helps explain why Nock appears to fade archaeologically rather than collapse, as its influence continued through transformation rather than disappearance. Later West African societies inherited not only Nock technologies and artistic principles, but also relational modes of social organization that emphasized community, ritual authority, and ethical restraint. The modern rediscovery of Nock culture has itself become part of this relational history, as contemporary scholars, local communities, and global audiences engage with Nock heritage in ways that reflect present-day values and power dynamics. The extraction of Nock artifacts into international markets disrupted these relationships, severing objects from their cultural and environmental contexts and reducing expressions of communal meaning to isolated commodities. Efforts to reverse this process through repatriation, site protection, and collaborative research represent attempts to restore relational integrity, acknowledging that heritage is not simply owned, but stewarded across generations. Understanding Nock as a civilization of relationships thus offers a powerful framework for ethical engagement with the past, emphasizing respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. From a comparative perspective, Nock's relational worldview resonates with indigenous philosophies worldwide, suggesting that alternative models of civilization based on interconnectedness rather than domination have deep historical roots. These models challenge modern assumptions that complexity requires hierarchy or that progress necessitates exploitation, offering instead examples of societies that balanced innovation with sustainability. In an era of global crisis marked by ecological degradation and social fragmentation, revisiting such historical models is not merely an academic exercise, but a source of insight into how human communities might reimagine their relationship with the world. Nock history reminds us that technology, art, and belief can be harmonized within ethical frameworks that prioritize long-term balance over short-term gain. As Part 9 of the Nock Culture series unfolds, Nock emerges as a profound example of how civilizations can be organized around relationships rather than domination, creating resilient systems capable of enduring transformation without losing their moral core. This perspective deepens our understanding of Nock, not only as an ancient African culture, but as a contributor to universal human questions about how to live together, how to relate to the earth, and how to pass meaning across generations. By engaging with Nok at this relational level, we gain insight into forms of civilization that have often been overlooked or undervalued, yet hold vital lessons for both historical understanding and contemporary life. The story of Nok thus continues to expand, not as a closed chapter of the past, but as an ongoing dialogue between ancient experience and modern reflection, reminding us that the most enduring civilizations are those built on relationships strong enough to adapt, transform, and endure across time. The Nok Culture series brings the narrative to a mature, integrative horizon by examining Nok not only as an ancient civilization, but as a lens through which the nature of history, memory, and human continuity itself can be more deeply understood. At this stage of reflection, Nok emerges as a powerful reminder that civilizations are not defined solely by their physical remains or political institutions, but by the patterns of thought, ethics, and lived relationships that persist even as outward forms change. The Nok world was one in which history was not archived in texts or monuments, but carried in bodies, skills, rituals, and landscapes, making memory an active, participatory process rather than a fixed record. Each generation did not simply inherit the past. It reenacted, reinterpreted, and renewed it through daily practice, ensuring that knowledge remained alive and adaptable rather than static. This mode of historical continuity helps explain the remarkable durability of Nok influence despite the eventual disappearance of clearly identifiable Nok material markers. What endured was not a name or a centralized authority, but a way of being in the world, characterized by balance between innovation and restraint, individuality and community, material mastery and spiritual accountability. Nok technology, especially ironworking, exemplifies this balance, as it transformed economic possibilities while remaining embedded in moral and ritual frameworks that limited excess and reinforced collective responsibility. Rather than driving social stratification or imperial ambition, technological advancement supported communal resilience, agricultural stability, and craft specialization without severing ties to ethical tradition. This integration challenges modern assumptions that technological progress naturally leads to hierarchy or exploitation, offering instead a historical example of innovation guided by shared values. Nok artistic expression likewise functioned as a form of historical consciousness, preserving and transmitting ideas about identity, dignity, and spiritual presence through visual language. The terracotta figures, with their expressive faces and deliberate stylization, can be understood as repositories of social memory, encoding collective understandings of what it meant to be human within the Nok cosmos. These figures did not glorify rulers or commemorate conquests, but reflected a society more concerned with inner life, moral awareness, and connection to unseen forces. In this sense, Nok art was less about representation than participation, inviting viewers into a shared symbolic world rather than imposing a singular narrative. The absence of monumental architecture or written chronicles thus appears not as a deficiency, but as a cultural choice, one that privileged relational permanence over physical permanence and ethical continuity over historical spectacle. As Nok traditions flowed into later West African cultures, this emphasis on continuity through transformation allowed core values to survive even as languages, artistic styles, and social structures evolved. The Nok legacy therefore operates like a deep current beneath the surface of history, shaping outcomes without always being visible in discrete forms. From a historiographical perspective, Nok compels scholars to rethink how civilizations are identified and valued, highlighting the limitations of frameworks that privilege centralized states, writing systems, or monumental construction. Nok demonstrates that complexity can exist without kings, that memory can persist without texts, and that influence can endure without empire. This realization has far-reaching implications for how African history is taught, studied, and integrated into global narratives, as it demands recognition of alternative civilizational pathways that have long been marginalized or misunderstood. The modern encounter with Nok culture has thus become an act of historical recalibration, correcting distortions created by colonial ideology and restoring African societies to their rightful place within the story of human creativity and intelligence. At the same time, this encounter raises ethical questions about ownership, interpretation, and responsibility, as Nok artifacts circulate in global institutions far removed from their cultural origins. The tension between scholarly access and cultural displacement underscores the need for approaches to heritage that prioritize context, consent, and collaboration, ensuring that Nok history remains connected to the communities and landscapes from which it emerged. In contemporary Nigeria, Nok has become a symbol of deep antiquity and cultural pride, offering a tangible link to a past that predates colonial disruption and challenges narratives of historical dependency. This symbolic power extends beyond national boundaries, resonating with the African diaspora and others seeking more inclusive and accurate accounts of global history. Nok thus operates not only as an object of study, but as a catalyst for dialogue about identity, justice, and the meaning of heritage in a globalized world. Philosophically, the Nok example invites reflection on the nature of civilization itself, suggesting that the most enduring societies are those that embed knowledge within ethical relationships rather than external structures. Nok society did not seek permanence through domination or monumentality, but achieved longevity through adaptability, shared meaning, and respect for ecological and spiritual limits. In an era marked by accelerating change and existential uncertainty, this ancient model offers a quiet but profound lesson about sustainability, reminding us that progress divorced from values ultimately undermines the conditions of its own survival. As Part 10 concludes, the Nok culture stands revealed not merely as an ancient chapter in African history, but as a vital contributor to humanity's collective wisdom, offering insights into how societies can thrive through balance, creativity, and moral coherence. The Nok story affirms that history is not only about what endures materially, but about what continues to matter, shaping human choices across generations, even when its origins fade from view. By engaging deeply with Nok, we expand our understanding of the past while also gaining perspective on the present, recognizing that the roots of innovation, art, and ethical life run deep and wide across the African continent. In acknowledging Nok's place within the human story, we honor a civilization that spoke through clay, iron, and lived practice rather than written word, yet whose voice remains powerful enough to challenge assumptions, inspire reflection, and remind us that the foundations of civilization are as diverse and interconnected as humanity itself.